It really is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Richard Hewett. I know you know him, sorry, I'm in catching my breath. Dr. Richard Hewett, who is he's kind of an old associate of mine, but our paths have crossed on many occasions, but this is the first time we've ever really had time to meet. Yeah. So he's a lecturer in media theory at the University of Salford School of Arts and Media, which is kind of Salford's equivalent of us.
Definitely.
Yeah. Very production based, and he does the theory, as do I, on this course, on the courses. It's well published. He's published 4 critical studies in television. I'll get that one in first. The TV Studies journal that I'm managing editor for, one of them. He's also the production of the BBC's 1951, 65 and 68 Sherlocks, which we're going to talk about now. And he's published in Adaptation, Journal of British Cinema and Television, and he's got a book coming out. Yay! Next year, we hope.
Yes.
Yes, definitely. Called it The Changing Spaces of Television Acting. Now, this is really exciting for me, and I'm sure for many others, because acting is quite a very unexplored area, and particularly television acting. So it really is very special for us to have Richard here today. Also, I have to say, on the 80th anniversary of the birth of TV. Oh yeah.
Exciting, well timed.
Well timed, and I really planned that well, didn't I? So, without any further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Richard, and let's just enjoy Sherlock.
Thank you very much,
Richard.
Cheers. Right, thank you very much. Thank you for having me here at the University of Hertfordshire. It's lovely to be back down south, away from Salford. Cold, wet and miserable, and that's just the people. Yes, I'm Dr. Richard Hewett, and I fell in love with Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes when I was just 11 years old, off school with a head cold, watching Basil Rathbone on BBC Two. I've since investigated the various television incarnations of Sherlock Holmes. I suspect you're all Sherlock fans. Benedict Cumberbatch, he's so dreamy. Well, we're going to look at some earlier versions here today to examine how acting for television has changed over the years and why that is so. As Kim said, I've previously published articles with regard to the BBC adaptations of the Sherlock Holmes stories in Adaptation and the Journal of British Cinema and Television. What I'm doing today, this presentation, is based on material that's in a chapter in an edited collection coming out next year called Exploring Television Acting. That's not my book, that's somebody else's book, but my bit is in that book. My book is The Changing Spaces of Television Acting, available from all good retailers next year. I will be signing copies in Waterstones. They don't know that yet, but I always had a pen on me. Now, given his status as one of literature's most popular creations, Holmes has in fact been less ubiquitous on British television screens than might be imagined. Having made his debut in 1951, played by Andrew Osborne in The Adventure of the Mazarin Stone, the Baker Street Sleuth returned a few months later in the guise of Alan Wheatley for a series of 6 live plays. Alan Wheatley, the Sheriff of Nottingham, in the original Robin Hood stories. And although the 1954 US series was shown in some ITV regions, viewers had to wait here until 1965 for a homegrown run of episodes, this time featuring Douglas Wilmer, who sadly died earlier this year. When this production returned in '68, Peter Cushing took the lead, and starting in '84, various Granada series starred Jeremy Brett in a long-running and internationally popular production which was sold to America quite successfully. Following his death in '95, there were very few attempts to revive Holmes in the UK. We had to wait until 2010 for the 21st century reimagining with Benedict Cumberbatch as Sherlock. So although Wheatley's live episodes are not preserved in the archive, the remaining productions offer a fascinating opportunity to trace not only developments in UK television acting style, but specific differences with regard to the portrayal of Sherlock Holmes on British TV screens. How have historical changes in the performance of Holmes and Watson been influenced by production context? Because as you probably know, television drama is made very differently today to how it was 50 years ago, or even 30 years ago. Now, I've written elsewhere on the role the production process plays in the shaping of TV performances, and Holmes's UK TV career conveniently spans the eras I've termed studio realism and location realism. That means from the multi-camera setup, which was used from the days of live TV back in 1936 when it all kicked off, really up until the 1980s, to the single camera location model, which is what predominates today. And if you are making stuff here. I'm guessing you're using single camera and you're going out on real locations. TV drama did not used to be made that way. It was all in the studio, it was all brightly lit, and had 3 or 4 cameras, clunky heavy cameras, not like we have today, moving around, manoeuvring, trying to get the actors in the frame and in focus. So, I'm going to quickly run through what I mean by studio and location realism. I published it elsewhere, it's in the book. But studio realism, actors are working in a constructed space, providing a link with the traditional practices of theatre performance. Studios in those days had 3-walled sets. You didn't have 4 walls and a ceiling, as you'd expect on a sound stage today. So it's a very artificial setup. Whereas location realism, actors today are working primarily in a real location, as opposed to a performance space created for that purpose. In studio realism, performances are prepared in advance in a separate space, such as the rehearsal room. In the old days, actors and directors would rehearse for a lengthy period before they would go into the studio to either transmit or record the performance. Okay? That rehearsal has completely gone out the window today. Today, performances are evolved on site. You rehearse when you get there to the location or to the sound stage with very little prior preparation for the actors. And that allows actors to respond to the environment in which they're working. We'll see examples of that in Sherlock. Studio realism, scenes are performed in their entirety. Actors would go all the way through the scene. You wouldn't stop and start again if you made a mistake. You didn't play it 6 or 7 times for different angles. You were being captured in real time on these 3 cameras, and directors were cutting between them as the performance was being given. Location realism, apart from master shot, which is like your establishing shot of the whole sequence, scenes are performed repeatedly in segments to accommodate different framings. Your medium shots, your close-ups, your extreme close-ups, your handheld shots. So actors have to play it 4 or 5 times exactly the same way, so it will match in the edit. Studio realism, representation of reality, is mediated by space, typically an artificial 3-walled set, and you'll see some very clunky examples of that from 1968, and technology. Location realism, representation of reality, is mediated by technology. There's still cameras involved, but less constrained by the use of an artificial or constructed performance space. Everything looks a lot more real and realistic on TV these days. Studio realism, use of voice and body is scaled down from the level you'd use in the theatre, because theatre is what actors were trained for in those days. They were not being trained for TV. But you're still using a greater degree of projection in speaking and in gesture than you'd use in real life, and again we'll see an example of that shortly. Location realism, body and voice, used on a scale much more similar to that we would use when we're speaking to somebody in an ordinary environment. Studio realism, physical movement often designed purely to provide visual interest within the set. People move around for no real reason. The characters have no objective, no motivation for moving around, but something's got to be happening in the frame, because otherwise it looks very boring and talky. Today, physical movement derives from the situation and character objectives, what the characters want or need. Studio realism, gestures employed selectively to signify meaning and intent. They're still on a smaller scale than that used on stage. You'll see a lot of pointy acting in old TV, a lot of gesticulation that's purely there to give the actors something to do with their hands. That's gone out of the window today as well. Gesture is there. It's minimal to signify meaning and intent. Very seldom in real life do you point at somebody or at an object when you are talking about it. That's what stage actors do, that's what TV actors used to do. And in studio realism, clarity of diction is paramount. You will see that these actors in the 60s had beautiful speaking voices. Every word is clearly enunciated. It is not realistic, it is not naturalistic, because we don't talk like that in real life. No overlapping dialogue in classic TV. Today, it's gone the other way. Clarity of diction is not always required. So, what I'm going to do is, I'm going to use 3 different versions of the opening sequence from The Hound of the Baskervilles, Conan Doyle's novella from 1902. It's one of the most adapted stories in the Holmes canon. Okay? And it's an opening sequence where basically a client comes to see Holmes and Watson. I point out that in Sherlock, it's not actually an adaptation, it is a pastiche, but we still have pretty much the same setup in terms of what is happening. Okay? Anyone not read or seen The Hound of the Baskervilles? Don't be shy if you haven't. I'll quickly run through it, so don't panic. It centres around the fears of Dr. James Mortimer for his new neighbour, Sir Henry Baskerville, who's just arrived from America to take up inheritance of the Baskerville estate following the death of his uncle, Sir Charles. Sir Charles had, according to the Dr. Mortimer, recently become obsessed with the legend of a spectral hound, and there is our spectral hound, believed to have killed his notorious ancestor, Sir Hugo. And the discovery of a dog's footprints next to Sir Charles's corpse has fuelled local superstitions. So the book opens with Watson, surreptitiously observed by Holmes in the reflection of his silver coffee pot, examining a walking stick left by the absent-minded Mortimer. So 3 versions there. 1968, Peter Cushing. 84, Jeremy Brett. 2012, Benedict Cumberbatch. We'll watch each of those and see how things have changed over the years. So here's Peter Cushing.
In fact, it's a curly-haired spaniel.
Oh, no.
How can you
Excuse me, we've entered halfway through.
Oh, did you eyes in the back of your head? But I had a...
Oh, sorry, that's... Do you want some of the lights off?
Well, Watson, what do you make of it? Oh, did you eyes in the back of your head? But I had a well-polished, silver-plated coffee pot in front of me. What do you make of our visitor's stick? Since we missed him last night and have no idea why he called, this accidental souvenir becomes of importance. Let me hear you reconstruct the man by examining it. Me, Holmes? You know my methods. Apply them. Yes. Yes, why don't I? Yes, well now, it has an inscription to James Mortimer, MRCS. He's a doctor. Excellent. From his friends of the CCH. 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 I should guess that to be the something hunt. Mm-hmm. Now the stick. Yes. Well, it does look rather badly knocked about. Now, what would that be? Yes. Evidently used for much walking. Oh, look! The ferrule is worn down. What? No, just a moment. I should say that he is an elderly country practitioner who does much of his visiting on foot. Watson, you excel yourself. Do I? You may not be luminous yourself, but you are a conductor of light. Some people, without possessing genius, have a remarkable power of stimulating it. I confess, my dear fellow, that I am very much in your head. Oh, it's pleasant to hear you say so, Holmes. Interesting. The elementary gives us the basis for several deductions. Has anything escaped me? I'm afraid, my dear Watson, that most of your conclusions were erroneous. But stimulating. Not that you were entirely wrong. The man is a country practitioner, and he walks a great deal. Then I was right. To that extent. But a presentation to a doctor is more likely to come from a hospital than from a hunt. And so the letter CCH suggests to me not the something hunt, but the Charing Cross Hospital. Oh. Well, I guess it's possible. And so he left a London hospital for a country practice. He could hardly have been on the staff of the hospital. Only a man well established in a London practice could hold such a position, and he would hardly drift into the country. He must therefore have been a house surgeon or a house physician, little more than a senior student. And since the stick was presented to him 5 years ago, the date is of it. Your elderly practitioner disappears, Watson. What we have in his place is a young fellow, amiable, unambitious, and absent-minded, and the owner of a dog, which I should describe as being larger than a terrier and smaller than a mastiff. Oh, come now, Holmes, you take too much license. Do I? Our caller was amiable enough to receive this stick as a token of esteem. Only an unambitious man abandons a London career for the country. And only an absent-minded one leaves his stick and not his visiting card when he comes to see you. And the dog? The teeth marks. And the space between them suggests a medium-sized dog. In fact, it's a curly-haired spaniel. Oh, how can you possibly know that? Because the dog and its owner have just entered this house. Oh. Would you admit our visitors, Watson? Dr. Mortimer. Mr. Sherlock Holmes. I'm so very glad. I wasn't at all sure where I'd left that. A presentation, I see. Yes, from my colleagues at Charing Cross Hospital. I presume it is Mr. Sherlock Holmes I'm addressing. Yes, indeed, and this is my friend, Dr. Watson. Glad to meet you, sir. How do you do? You interest me very much, Mr. Holmes. I had hardly expected so dolichocephalic a skull, or such a well-marked supraorbital development. It is not my intention to be fulsome, sir, but I confess a cast of your skull would be an ornament to any anthropological museum. I perceive, sir, that you are an enthusiast in your line of thought as I am in mine, but I'm sure you didn't come here to discuss my skull. May I offer you a cigarette?
Thank you, no, I prefer to manufacture my own.
Then have no hesitation in lighting one.
Thank you. Oh, yes. In the meantime, perhaps this will help to explain why I'm here.
Yes, that's early 18th century, I should think.
The exact date is 1742. It is a statement of a certain legend that was in the Baskerville family.
Well, you wish me to read this now? If you would be so good, sir.
Okay. I think that's enough. So you can see that TV acting back in 1968, very different from what we would expect today. The scene opens with a foreground close-up of the coffee pot, that's the earlier death of Sir Charles, through the handle of which Holmes, Peter Cushing, can be seen observing the off-camera Watson's, Nigel Stock's, examination. The camera then pulls out and pans left, somewhat jerkily, to reveal Watson, before cutting to a close-up of the stick in his hands. When Holmes asked Watson to apply his own methods and reconstruct the man by examining his stick, the line is clearly enunciated by Cushing and projected at a volume slightly louder than that which would be needed for a normal conversation in a similarly sized space. However, both here and throughout the episode, Cushing does not over-project, and his Holmes is notably softer spoken than either Brett's or Cumberbatch's. An experienced television actor who had by this point spent several years working in film, Peter Cushing had learned to scale down his performance from that which would be necessary, for example, in the theatre. In this sense, while his acting might still be regarded as somewhat stage-derived, you wouldn't call it naturalistic by today's standards. He represents a breed of actor that was coming to understand the degree of vocal projection and scale of physical gesticulation required for the multi-camera television studio setup. Indeed, Cushing, in several respects, is much less theatrical than the later Brett and Cumberbatch, although, as will be seen, this was more due to personal style than anything else. In contrast, Nigel Stock, as Dr. Watson, is far more projected, overstressing key words to convey meaning. His delivery of the line, "Me, Holmes," emphasising Watson's surprise that Holmes should solicit his opinion. Much has been made of the fact that Watson has a buffoonish history of portrayals in the cinema, like Nigel Bruce opposite Basil Rathbone. And while some claim that Stock here was a departure from that stereotype, his performance choices serve as clear signalling devices that this character is, alas, setting himself up for a fall in his attempts to apply Holmes's deductive methods. Signifiers include Watson's self-satisfied chuckle at his cleverness in deducing that the owner of a well-worn stick walks frequently, hardly a difficult conclusion, as does his dramatic turn towards Holmes when he exclaims, "He's a doctor!" Finally, Stock's adoption of the stance of a performer, arms slightly bent at his sides as Watson delivers his coup de grace. I should say the owner is an elderly practitioner. This provides a comic prelude to Holmes's gentle yet devastating debunking and correction of the majority of Watson's deductions. The scene also features much unnecessary physical movement designed to provide visual interest in what would otherwise be a static conversation, rather than deriving from the objectives of the characters themselves. To facilitate Stock's movement into a position from which both he and the walking stick will be in medium close-up, it's necessary for he and Cushing to swap positions. The latter, therefore, moves out of shot towards the rear of the set in order to light his cigarette, an action that's not specified in the book, leaving Stock free to move forward to where Cushing had previously been sitting. Stock then moves to the left of the frame, the camera tracking with him as Cushing returns downstage to seat himself in a different chair, now facing Stock but with the back of his head to the camera as he smokes. He then rises, takes the stick from Stock and crosses back to where the latter had begun the scene for the purpose of obtaining his magnifying glass, with which he then commences his own investigation, leaving Stock downstage and on the right of the frame, and that's a reversal of their original positioning. Now, such manoeuvres illustrate both the perceived need for some form of action on screen and the lack of mobility of the pedestal-mounted studio cameras, but they at least demonstrate an attempt on the part of director Graham Evans to avoid an entirely frontal projective performance, and to escape that sense of a three-walled set which typifies studio realism. However, there are several moments where the demands of multi-camera are extremely obvious. While Cushing examines the stick in the background, Stock remains at the front of the frame in medium close-up, so his increasingly affronted facial expressions can be read by the camera. At this point, Stock is standing partially side-on to the camera, his back to Cushing as the latter continues to speak. Now that's hardly a natural position for two people conducting a conversation, but it's necessary if the faces of both of them are going to be visible to the audience at home. After Holmes observes the arrival of both Mortimer and his curly-haired spaniel through the window, Cushing here is clearly aware of the camera tracking backwards as he moves forwards, controlling his pace to avoid collision. The camera is moving as he moves. Then he pulls a thoughtful face, eyes moving sideways to indicate cogitation. As Dr. Mortimer, David Leland takes a similarly gestural path to Nigel Stock, pointing at his stick in recognition when he enters the set and exclaiming loudly. The actor then strolls round the apartment in long shot as Mortimer outlines the mysterious circumstances surrounding Sir Charles's death. Now, while it's possible a client would so dominate the space of a famous detective on his first visit, Mortimer's pacing arguably typifying the nervous energy with which Leland imbues the character, this movement again demonstrates the perceived need to provide some form of visual stimulus. Leland's gestural performance is completed by him raising his hand in a manner that can only be described as dramatic on the line, "By the time I reached him, he was dead," to describe the murder of Sir Charles. So of the three performers in this scene, Cushing would, by today's standards, probably be regarded as the least projected. Moments such as the sudden exhalation of smoke through his nostrils when Mortimer confesses to coveting Holmes's skull, or the brushing of cigarette ash from his dressing gown, seemingly occur spontaneously, but they were doubtless carefully rehearsed bits of business. However, even with Cushing, though, there are also examples of stage-derived gestural acting. The actor uses Holmes's cigarette and magnifying glass to point and gesture, though not as broadly as Nigel Stock and David Leland, and also employs several non-verbal signifiers, such as an intrigued "ah" when Mortimer hands Holmes the scroll detailing the legend of the Hound. So the 1968 scene is indicative that actors in the studio realist era were gradually reducing the scale of performance used for stage work. This wouldn't be big enough for theatre, but it's still bigger than you'd expect from TV acting today. Some performers, whether through instinct or experience, were adapting more quickly than others. Peter Cushing gets it. He understands what acting for TV at this point means. The other two are still slightly theatrical, slightly stage-derived. But by the time of the Granada television film in 1988, the increased use of single camera instead of multi-camera meant that major changes were taking place in the way things were performed for TV. So I'm now going to show you the same scene, but this time performed different set of actors, single camera film, not multi-camera videotape, and we'll see how it's adjusted. Excellent. Okay, I think I'll just skip backwards. Where's it going?
What do you make of it, Watson?
Huh? You got eyes on the back of your head, haven't you?
Well, I have a well-polished coffee pot in front of me. Mrs. Hudson said it was left last night while you were out. What do you make of it?
Ah. His name, at least, we know. I think Dr. Mortimer is a successful, elderly medical man, well esteemed, since those who know him gave him this mark of their appreciation. Yeah. I think he's a country practitioner, does a good deal of visiting on foot. Friends of CCH. I should guess that to be the local hunt.
Oh, bravo. Bravo, Watson! You know, I am bound to say you habitually underrate your abilities. It may be that you are not yourself luminous, but you are a conductor of light. Some people without possessing genius have a remarkable power of stimulating it. I confess that, my dear fellow, I am very much in your debt.
Thank you.
But I am afraid that most of your conclusions were erroneous. H. Surely, hospital. CC suggests Charing Cross. I mean, if so, I would postulate a young man, under 30, amiable, absent-minded, unambitious, and the possessor of a dog. May I see the stick? Oh, thank you. Larger than a terrier. Smaller mastiff. That's right. A curly-haired spaniel. Oh. Dr. Mortimer?
Thank you, sir. Thank you. I wasn't sure whether I'd left it here or at the shipping office. The SS Gibraltar UC docks today at Tilbury.
Ah.
You interest me very much, Mr. Holmes. I had hardly expected so dolichocephalic a skull, or such well-marked supraorbital development. Would you have any objection to my running my finger along your parietal fissure?
Please, Dr. Mortimer.
A cast of your skull, sir, until the original becomes available. It is not my intention to be fulsome, but I confess, I covet your skull.
Behave and sit down.
What? What?
Well, I presume that it was not your phrenological passion which drew you to Baker Street.
Unfortunately, it was not, sir. What? I have here the statement of a certain legend which runs in the Baskerville family.
Baskerville.
Yeah, I'm an executor of Sir Charles Baskerville's will and found it amongst his papers. It concerns Hugo de Baskerville, who was lord of the manor of Grimpen on Dartmoor.
Dartmoor?
Some 200 years ago. The document is somewhat later.
Learn then from this story to be circumspect in the future. For those foul passions whereby our family have suffered may not be loosed again to our culpable ruin. 8th of November 1742. It's an intriguing preamble.
I read of Sir Charles Baskerville's death. From a medical point of view, it was a poorly informed aftermath.
No, thank you. He died of dyspnea and cardiac exhaustion.
Were the conditions linked or were they apparent?
Though they were linked, in my opinion. There was some facial distortion.
Caused by the cardiac pain, presumably. Yes. You sound doubtful.
It was not merely facial distortion.
Well, the year 1692, Hugo de Baskerville abducted a young girl. But she escaped across the moor at night. Curse him! He unhandled his pack of hounds.
So basically, Holmes then reads the legend and dismisses it, effectively, before his curiosity is piqued. Now, I will need my glasses. So, in the late 1980s, single-camera film production was beginning to overtake multi-camera as the preferred production model for British television drama. Certainly if it was a quality series, it would be made on film single-cam, not videotape multi-cam. By the time the production of these Sherlock Holmes stories ceased in the 1990s, multicam was only really employed for situation comedies, much as it is today, and soap operas again, Coronation Street, EastEnders. But this shift was a very slow one, and the projected, gesture-inflected style of studio realism did not just disappear overnight, it was a gradual process. The 1988 version of The Hound opens with Sir Charles's death as part of the title sequence. We then cut to shots of Granada's exterior Baker Street set, ending up with a slow close-up on the door to 221B. This then cuts to a medium interior shot of Holmes, Brett with the coffee pot, the lid of which Brett lifts to observe Watson, signalling Holmes's enjoyment with a slight smile. Watson, Edward Hardwicke, is also seated in the background with his back to the camera, but turns, startled, on Holmes's line, "What do you make of it, Watson?" And from the outset, Jeremy Brett is far more vocally projected than Edward Hardwicke, which is a reverse of the 1968 situation, due largely to Brett's more overtly theatrical performance. While both Peter Cushing, a long-time fan of Conan Doyle's work, and Jeremy Brett immersed themselves in the character of Holmes, the latter arguably drew upon his own personality to a far greater extent, and the producer Michael Cox is not alone in his speculation regarding the extent to which the actor's bipolar disorder, then known as manic depression, informed his performance. Brett famously stated Holmes was a manic depressive. Well, was Holmes a manic depressive? Jeremy Brett certainly was. Brett's version of the detective is far more of a performer than Peter Cushing's, for example, applauding and shouting "Bravo!" when Watson concludes his largely inaccurate analysis of Mortimer's walking stick. There's far more of a sense in this version of Holmes setting Watson up for a fall and quite enjoying the process. Cushing's Holmes was genuinely curious to see what Watson would make of it. For his part, Edward Hardwicke presents a far more restrained Watson than Nigel Stocks. The small pauses in his speech being indicative of Watson actually thinking through his examination of the stick. Hardwicke employs far fewer physical and non-verbal signifiers, other than Watson's small nod to himself and a narrowing of the eyes as he reads the inscription on the stick, and a quiet "oh" when Holmes berates him for habitually underestimating his abilities. He does adopt a slightly defensive posture, with his hand on his hip when Holmes begins to challenge his productions, but these moments are balanced by naturalistic touches such as Hardwicke speaking with a cigarette in his mouth as he goes to light it. It's also notable that once he has risen, Hardwicke's Watson is fairly static. Although he walks to the fireplace to light the cigarette after examining the stick, he does not feel the need to stroll around the apartment as Stock did. There's no need here for multi-camera style blocking to engage the viewer's eye, as movement within the space is provided instead by the director, Brian Mills, cutting between single camera setups. A low, medium close-up of Hardwicke as Watson examines a stick, a close-up of Brett for Holmes's reactions, alternating with the initial medium shot. By contrast, even when not projecting vocally, Brett's delivery is somewhat mannered, signalling the coming admonishment of Watson with a wry facial expression indicative of Holmes attempting to conceal a smirk. Okay, as Holmes makes his own pronouncements regarding Mortimer's stick, Brett's voice veers between extremes of volume, becoming quite loud when Holmes deduces their client is the possessor of a dog. The line, "larger than a terrier," is similarly voluble, seemingly pitched towards Watson, but the next, "smaller than a mastiff," is almost whispered, with Brett now in extreme close-up. It's unclear why Holmes would want Watson to hear the first half of his sentence, but not the second. And this variation in volume is almost certainly due to the performance choices of Jeremy Brett, and is not dictated by the text. This is followed by a triumphantly noisy "hmm" after Holmes moves to the window and observes Mortimer and his spaniel alighting outside. Played here by Neil Duncan, Dr. Mortimer is initially no less projected than Leland's 1968 incarnation, his eyes widening in fascination as he admires Holmes's cranium. Brett's reaction to Mortimer's request for a cast of Holmes's skull until the original becomes available is a full-throated chortle, followed by a pert "behave and sit down." However, the fact that Duncan remains seated for the rest of the scene provides a marked contrast with David Leland's unnecessary roaming around 221B in 1968. As Mortimer describes Sir Charles's death, his voice now softer, he's kept in medium-sized framings between reaction shots of Holmes and Watson. And Duncan then removes his glasses and looks away in partial reverie as Mortimer recalls the dead man's facial distortion. Now this could indicate either that Mortimer finds the memory disturbing, or that, as a medical man, he's mulling over the possible cause. A moment such as this would have been difficult to manage using the 1968 multi-camera setup, in which Mortimer never dominated the frame, and was usually on the move, as were the cameras. The main physical movement in the 1988 version is provided by Brett, who moves across to Duncan to take the scroll containing the legend of the hound, and then stands next to Hardwicke as Holmes reads it aloud. Okay. Leaving aside the performance of Jeremy Brett, who by this point was bringing much of his extravagant personal style and several of his personal demons to his portrayal, Edward Hardwicke and Neil Duncan are in general noticeably scaled down in terms of vocal projection and physical gesture when compared with the 1968 counterparts, though it's Hardwicke whose performance is arguably best adapted to single camera. Now, by the time of Sherlock, nearly a quarter of a century later, this mode of performance, the scaled-down, realistic, naturalistic performance, had become the dominant form of British television acting, location realism. We're now going to watch the 2012 Sherlock version of the meeting. Bear in mind, please, this is not an adaptation, so it's not exactly the same dialogue. We still have the same setup of a client coming to visit Holmes and Watson. Okay? And I will have to switch off the audio for a second.
Pilot, and when we're doing pilots, actually.
Because although it would be fascinating to listen to Mark Gatiss' commentary, that is not what we're here for. There we go.
Well, that was tedious.
You went on the tube like that?
Well, the couch would take me. Nothing.
Military coup in Uganda? Another photo of you with the, cabinet reshuffle?
Nothing of importance? Oh, God! John, I need some. Get me some.
No.
Get me some.
No. Cold turkey, we agreed, no matter what. Anyway, you paid everyone off, remember? No one within a 2-mile radius will sell you any.
Stupid idea. Whose idea was that? Mrs. Hudson!
Look, Sherlock, you're doing really well. Don't give up now.
Tell me what they are. Please. Tell me. Please.
Calm down, sorry.
I'll let you know next week's lottery numbers. It's worth a try. My secret supply, what have you done with my secret supply? Cigarettes, what have you done with them? Where are they?
You know you never let me touch your things. Oh, chance would be a fine thing.
But you weren't my housekeeper.
I'm not.
Ah.
How about a nice cuppa, and perhaps you could put away your
I need
harpoon.
something stronger than tea. 7% stronger. Can you see Mr. Chatterjee again?
Pardon?
Sandwich shop, that's a new dress. There's flour on the sleeve. You wouldn't dress like that for baking.
Sherlock.
Thumbnail, tiny traces of foil. Been at the scratch cards again, we all know where that leads, don't we? Casbah Nights. Pretty racy for first thing on a Monday morning, wouldn't you agree? I've written a little blog on the identification of perfumes. It's on the website, you should look it up.
Please.
I wouldn't put any hopes on that cruiser, Mr. Chatterjee. He's got a wife at Doncaster that nobody knows about.
Shut up!
Nobody except me.
I don't know what you're talking about. I really don't.
The bloody hell was all that about? I don't understand. Go after her and apologise.
Apologise? Oh, John, I envy you so much.
You envy me?
Your mind, so placid, straightforward, barely used. Mine's like an engine, racing out of control. A rocket tearing itself to pieces, trapped on the launch pad. I need a case!
You've just solved one by harpooning a dead pig, apparently.
That was this morning. When's the next one?
Nothing on the website.
Dear Mr. Sherlock Holmes, I can't find Bluebell anywhere. Please, 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 can you help?
Bluebell?
A rabbit, John.
Oh.
Ah, but there's more. Before Bluebell disappeared, it turned luminous, like a fairy, according to little Kirsty. Then the next morning, Bluebell was gone. Hutch still locked. No sign of a forced entry. What am I saying? This is brilliant. Phone Lestrade. Tell him there's an escaped rabbit.
You serious?
It's this. Or Cluedo.
No. We are never playing that again.
Why not?
Because it's not actually possible for the victim to have done it, Sherlock, that's why.
There's any possible solution.
It's not in the rules!
Well, then the rules are wrong!
Single ring.
Maximum pressure just under the half second. Client.
Dartmoor. It's always been a place of myth and legend. But is there something else lurking out here? Something very real. Because Dartmoor is also home to one of the government's most secretive operations. The Chemical and Biological Weapons Research Center, which is said to be even more sensitive than Portland Down. Since the end of the Second World War, There have been persistent stories about the basketball experiments, genetic mutations, animals grown for the battlefield. There are many who believe that within this compound, in the heart of this ancient wilderness, there are horrors beyond imagining. But the real question is, are all of them still inside?
I was just a kid. It was on the moor. It was dark, but I know what I saw. I know what killed my father.
What did you see?
Oh, I was just about to say.
Yes, in a TV interview. I prefer to do my own editing.
Yes. Sorry, yes, of course.
In your own time, but quite quickly.
Do you know Dartmoor, Mr. Holmes?
No.
It's an amazing place. It's like nowhere else. It's sort of bleak, but beautiful.
Not interested. Moving on.
We used to go for walks after my mum died, my dad and me. Every evening we go out onto the moor.
Yes, good. Skipping to the night that your dad was violently killed. Where did that happen?
There's a place, it's a sort of local landmark called Jewers Hollow. That's an ancient name for the devil.
So?
Did you see the devil that night? Yes. It was huge. Coal, black fur with red eyes. It got him. Tore him apart. I can't remember anything else. They found me the next morning, just wandering on the moor. My dad's body was never found.
Got red eyes, coal black fur, enormous dog, wolf, or a genetic experiment.
Are you laughing at me, Mr. Holmes?
Why, are you joking?
My dad was always going on about the things they were doing at Baskerville. About the type of monsters they were breeding there. People used to laugh at him. At least the TV people took me seriously.
I assume did wonders for Devon tourism.
Yeah. Henry, whatever did happen to your father, it was 20 years ago. Why come to us now?
Not sure you can help me, Mr. Holmes, since you find it all so funny.
Because of what happened last night.
What happened last night?
How do you know?
I didn't know, I noticed. Came up from Devon on the first available train this morning. You had a disappointing breakfast and a cup of black coffee. The girl in the seat across the aisle fancied you. Although you were initially keen, you've now changed your mind. You are, however, extremely anxious to have your first cigarette of the day. Sit down, Mr. Knight, and do please smoke. I'd be delighted.
How on earth did you notice all that?
It's not important.
Punched out holes for your ticket's been
Not
checked.
now, Sherlock.
Oh, please, I've been cooped up here for
You're
ages.
just showing off.
Of course, I am a chef, that's what we do. Tray napkin, you used to mop up the spilled coffee. Strength of the stain shows that you didn't take milk with traces of ketchup on it and around your lips and on your sleeve. Cooked breakfast, the nearest thing those trains can manage, probably a sandwich.
How did you know it was disappointing?
Is there any other type of breakfast on a train? The girl, female handwriting is quite distinctive. Wrote her phone number down on the napkin. I could tell from the angle she wrote out that she was sat across from you on the other side of the aisle. Later, after she got off, I imagine you used the napkin to mop up your spilled coffee, accidentally smudging the numbers. You've been over the last 4 digits yourself and another pence. You wanted to keep the number just now, though you used the napkin to blow your nose. Maybe you're not that into her after all. Then there's the nicotine stains on your fingers, your shaking fingers. I know the signs. No chance to smoke one on the train, no time to rob one before you got a cab here. It's just after 9:15. You're desperate. The first train from Exeter to London leaves at 5:46 a.m. You've got the first one possible, so something important must have happened last night. Am I wrong?
No. You're right. You're completely, exactly right. Bloody hell, I heard you were quick.
It's my job.
Now shut up and smoke. Harry, your parents both died, and you were, what, 7 years old? And,
We'll leave it on that, I think. Thank you very much, Kim. So, as with the 1988 version, the episode proper begins with a shot of the door to 221B. There it is. Yes. This time being forcibly slammed by Sherlock. One element of this version arguably lacking, or at least underplayed, in the earlier versions is the black humour, which forms a major component of script, of mise-en-scène, and of performance, as indicated by the cut to a point-of-view shot of Sherlock's feet, panning upwards to reveal him bloodied and carrying a harpoon before cutting to John for Freeman's line, "You went on the tube like that." Following an ellipse, Sherlock is shown striding restlessly around the flat, still carrying his harpoon, but now bathed and wearing a dressing gown. Unlike the cumbersome multi-camera of the 1968 version and the largely static single-camera setups employed in 1988, the Hounds of Baskerville uses handheld camera throughout to follow Cumberbatch round the frame, while Freeman remains seated, signifying his role as the calm voice of reason. Although Cumberbatch is here occupying the space of 221B in much the same way as Stock and Leland did in 1968, his actions are motivated by Sherlock's inability to settle until some fresh stimulus presents itself, rather than being devised purely for the sake of providing visual interest. In terms of vocal performance, Cumberbatch is not projected in a stage-derived sense, although he does employ loud, explosive declamations in a manner not dissimilar to Brett's to signify Sherlock's sense of frustration, bellowing "God!" before commanding John to "get me some cigarettes." When John refuses, Cumberbatch begins frantically rifling through piles of newspapers, calling for his landlady-cum-housekeeper, Mrs. Hudson, Una Stubbs. The continuing calm of Freeman's performance, seated, static, passive, again contrasts with Cumberbatch's manic physical performance. The arrival of Mrs. Hudson provides an interesting contrast in terms of generational acting styles. Una Stubbs' television acting career began in the 1950s, later including the long-running sitcom Till Death Us Do Part. In Sherlock, the character of Mrs. Hudson is much enlarged from the sketchy descriptions provided by Doyle, functions primarily, but not exclusively, as comic relief, and as an experienced sitcom performer, Stubbs' acting style at times features slightly projected traits. For example, gesturing to her Sherlock's piles of bric-a-brac on the line, "You know you never touch me, let me touch your things. Chance will be a fine thing." When Sherlock seizes upon Mrs. Hudson's appearance as an opportunity to exert his analytical powers, Cumberbatch's performance, while still manic, becomes more focused, speaking rapidly as he rattles out deductions. Comedy is provided by Cumberbatch pointing at Mrs. Hudson with the harpoon, as though it's not occurred to him that this is a dangerous weapon. As Sherlock reveals that Mrs. Hudson's current beau has a secret wife in Doncaster that nobody knows about, nobody except me, Cumberbatch employs jazz hands, indicative of Sherlock's awareness that he's showing off his powers as part of a performance. After Mrs. Hudson's distraught exit, Cumberbatch sits in Holmes's armchair with knees drawn up, rocking backwards and forwards to signify the character's distraction. Two contrasts between this episode and the earlier versions are the much faster rate of cutting, several shots lasting less than a second, particularly in the initial exchanges between Sherlock, John and Mrs. Hudson, and the use of a 16:9 widescreen frame, as opposed to the 4:3 ratio that was common until the 1990s. As Sarah Cardwell has observed, the latter has a significant impact on framings, as for example where at the conclusion of their argument John and Sherlock are shown at opposite ends of the frame, in long shot emphasising the physical and emotional distance between them. The use of rapid editing means that far greater number of takes would be required here than for the 1968 and 1988 versions. In 68, the scene as broadcast would have been recorded in just 2 takes, one before, one after the ellipse, each segment played all the way through, unless mistakes were made. In 1988, a greater degree of repetition would have been required, with the first take representing the master shot, possibly played all the way through, and then dialogue would be repeated several times in order to facilitate the various medium shots and close-ups of Brett, Hardwick and Duncan, which would then be pieced together in the edit. By 2012, the number of repeat takes has increased significantly to accommodate a variety of framings, including medium shots in the main living space, long shots through the door of the kitchen, medium close-ups and extreme close-ups of Cumberbatch, Freeman and Stubbs, all of which are handheld. These three processes represent different demands upon the casts involved and result in widely divergent performance styles. The frantic pace and editing, performance and editing in The Hounds of Baskerville slow significantly with the arrival of Henry Knight, and the camera setups at this point come to more closely resemble those of 1988, a mix of close-ups, medium shots of the three protagonists while Henry outlines his case. There are several over-the-shoulder, shot-reverse shots between Sherlock and Henry, and it's notable the pace of cutting has slowed down significantly, giving Russell Tovey time to exhibit Henry's nervousness. Now, while Tovey's vocal performance barely moves above a whisper, there's a sense of him clearly signalling Henry's troubled mental state. There's a break in his voice when he talks about Dewar's Hollow, the place where his father was killed, and he looks away as his character recalls the father's death, his voice breaking and catching. When Sherlock seems not to be taking his story seriously, Tovey's eyes begin watering, and the last two words of the line, "I'm not sure you can help me, Mr. Holmes, since you find it all so funny," become venomous. Tovey then quickly rises to leave, but when Sherlock reveals he knows something happened to him the previous night, he sits again incredulously. By contrast, Cumberbatch signals Holmes's distraction via the nervous twitching of his fingers as he rests his face upon his hand. He gestures with his hands on the line, not interested, moving on, which is delivered in a fast, flat monotone. Cumberbatch then employs a sotto voce stage whisper when Holmes mocks Henry by speculating the appearance of the hound was part of a genetic experiment, and delivers Sherlock's deductions regarding Henry's journey in another rapid monotone. When Holmes leans in to sniff Henry's cigarette smoke, the moment is played for comedy. Cumberbatch's voice here remains low and fast, but the change in tone as Sherlock asks what Henry saw the previous night indicates he is now taking it seriously. Overall, Cumberbatch's performance comprises a blend of the projected or gestural, waving Henry away on the line, "Off to Devon with you, have a cream tea on me," putting a mock sad face when Sherlock pretends he's too busy to come to Dartmoor, and at the same time still and focused, providing more than an echo of Brett's manic depressive performance. As with the 1988 version, the most restrained performance here comes from Martin Freeman as John. Though he's required to display a greater range of emotions, disbelief at Sherlock's behaviour, restraint as he attempts to keep his temper with his friend, frustration at the latter's display of his deductive powers for a client's benefit, Freeman does this with a great sense of economy. There's virtually no gestural acting, other than John holding up his finger when the doorbell rings just once, announcing Henry's arrival. While, like Humor's Stubbs, Martin Freeman is an experienced comedy performer, the sitcom via which he came to prominence, The Office, has been hailed by Brett Mills as comedy verite, the diametric opposite of the projected multi-camera sitcom. An example of this is Freeman's underplayed reaction to Sherlock's insensitive line to Henry, "Yes, good, skipping to the night your dad was violently killed. Where did that happen?" Freeman also employs in-character touches, such as the former soldier, John Watson, almost standing to attention, ready for action, when Sherlock charges him with travelling to Dartmoor to investigate the case. Overall, The Hounds of Baskerville offers several contrasts with earlier versions, proving a far livelier sequence in terms of framing, camera movement, and editing. Despite the fact the scene is similarly dialogue-heavy, there's none of the movement for movement's sake that was present in 1968. But at the same time, we don't have the static single-camera setups of 1988. The performance of Martin Freeman in particular demonstrates how far television acting has scaled down to become more naturalistic in the era of location realism. But to what extent is this due to changing production processes? One factor that impacted upon the performances in each of these productions was the amount of rehearsal time allocated. Each of the BBC's 1968 episodes had 9 days outside rehearsal. That's 9 days in a rehearsal room, practicing the lines, practicing the moves, with coloured tape on the floor to represent the sets. Then they went into the studio on the day of recording, first time in costume, first time with sets. So it's all neatly choreographed far in advance of recording. With the 1988 version and the 2012 version, you have got far less rehearsal time. Just check. Yeah, Mark Gatiss told me that they only have like 2 days to rehearse a 90-minute episode of Sherlock. They'll go to a church hall and run through the key scenes, and then they take it onto the real locations. That's 2 days for 90 minutes compared with 9 days for 50 minutes in the 1960s. What's also notable about the 88 version and the 2012 version is that they have standing sets. A standing set is on a soundstage or in a real building, and it's semi-permanent. It's there for the duration of production schedule, rather than being a 3-wall set which is put up and taken down purely for the duration of recording. So each of these provides the production with a base which becomes a location in its own right. And Gatiss said to me, it's something that's incredibly useful. We had to relocate a couple of scenes to Baker Street because we ran out of time. You think with a bit of jiggery-pokery we can move that scene there. So it's possible, with less time available to pre-plan movement and gesture, performance in the present day becomes a far more natural response to the environment the actors find themselves in on the day of recording, rather than, as in 1968, being a pre-planned orchestration from which performers cannot deviate. So to conclude, a number of variables can affect the performances given by television actors, including their own personalities and their own performance styles. We see that in Jeremy Brett compared with Peter Cushing. And this can be informed by their background, the drama training or lack of drama training, and the amount of experience they've acquired in a particular medium. But the significant changes in production process employed on British television drama are clearly evidenced in the performances which in some part result from them in the 1968, 88 and 2012 versions of The Hound of the Baskervilles. These 3 productions offer a snapshot of historical developments in TV acting, from the still largely theatre-derived gestural performances which typified studio realism to the scaled-down, far less projected style of location realism we've come to expect and accept today. Even when compared via a character like Sherlock Holmes, whose special place in the hearts and minds of the public could make him a potentially problematic subject, these differences are clearly highlighted via the performances seen in these case studies. Thank you very much for your time. Are there any questions?
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kim.
Excellent. I immediately want to go and watch Sherlock now.
The modern version?
Yeah.
Just that?
No, Jeremy Brett is my Sherlock, yeah.
Yes.
That showed my age. Grace, a question.
Hi, I enjoyed that. I've got a question about the character that the 3 actors were playing as a Victorian. I wondered whether you thought that the renditions of Holmes were at all informed by the fact that the character that they were playing was a Victorian character, and their knowledge of a relative lack of naturalism, a relative mannerism in Victorian acting.
Well, if Holmes had been performed on stage in the Victorian era, it would have been a very mannered performance.
Yes.
The most famous one is William Gillette, who sort of became the template for the Holmes that came afterwards. I spoke to some people at the Sherlock Holmes Society of London, and they said you can see a difference in the older actors because they would have been born in an age where people still remembered the Victorian gentleman. So someone like Peter Cushing, Douglas Wilmer, when they were boys, they still have had that sort of trace memory from the Victorian Edwardian era of how people behaved. Whereas someone like Jeremy Brett, who's that bit younger than they were, would have come from a more 1920s, 1930s background. I think Brett's is far less of a Victorian gentleman than Peter Cushing's. Peter Cushing's is far more gentle and restrained and well-mannered. And Brett is clearly determined to play Holmes as this fairly abrasive character who cares nothing for the standards of the day, is quite happy to offend people, and he quite likes the fact that Dr. Mortimer there is equally eccentric and off the wall, and he responds well to that. But I think there's certainly a received way that a Victorian character is expected to be played on television. And it would be refreshing if you saw a modern version of Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes stories played by someone like Holmes, as they sort of did in the Christmas special, but it all turns out to be a fantasy, and played in a much more naturalistic way. That would be interesting to see. They kind of tried it in 2002 with another adaptation of Hound of the Baskervilles with Richard Roxburgh from one of the Harry Potter films, and he played as a much more naturalistic, less projective Holmes, and the public didn't like him. He's sandy-haired, he's quite slight, He didn't look like Holmes. It was a Christmas special, didn't go down very well at all. I think people still expect a certain theatricality from Sherlock Holmes. You get that with Cumberbatch, don't you?
Stephen.
Yeah, following on from Grace's question, really. I was wondering if you had any thoughts about the representation of friendship between Holmes and Watson. So it's quite apparent in the first two, and that particular, I mean, which comes across in the novels, where you get this particular kind of asexual kind of bond between the two, and how it seems to have disappeared in the last version. I'm just thinking in the way in which the acting is framed over the sequence of years that you've shown in the excerpts. What your thoughts were about whether that's still a kind of current force in the conceptualization of the character.
That's a good point. I think that the purpose of the modern Sherlock is to trace the development of the friendship between Sherlock and John. And so we get the first episode. It's the only adaptation or pastiche where we haven't seen them in situ, in media res, as it were. We've seen them meet for the first time and the friendship develop. And I think that's because Mark Gatiss and Stephen Moffat know that modern television audiences like character arcs. They like to see development. And I feel, aside of Study in Scarlet, the book where they meet for the first time, the friendship between John and Watson and Holmes in the books is pretty much implicit. We don't really see it develop beyond those first few pages of the Study in Scarlet. And I think that's what you get with the earlier version. It's just there, it's implicit. And the charm of Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson is we enjoy those scenes in Baker Street with them just mulling things over and having little arguments, and we kind of want to be there with them as their friend. It's very sort of established, and you say calm, asexual friendship that's just in place.
But that's a kind of very Victorian configuration, that you would have that level of asexual intimacy between two men.
And it's interesting, they feel the need in Sherlock to bring in the first episode, are you gay, are you gay, and raising it as an issue because two men are going to live together, and Mrs. Hudson assuming they must be gay, none of which was ever present in the original Holmes stories or adaptations. But I think people would not, I don't know if modern audiences expect to see that development. We're getting them here. You're seeing Martin Freeman's Watson becoming quite fed up with Holmes. He's quite browned off that Holmes feels the need to show off, whereas in the first episodes he's absolutely impressed and bowled over by this, and now they've known each other long enough that it no longer impresses him. They expect to see development of character, which we didn't expect, or had in the Victorian audience. For something like Holmes, it was like this serialised format. We didn't expect characters to develop, we just wanted a good yarn, and that's sort of put out the window. I think the friendship has taken pride of place, certainly in the second and third series, more than the solving of crimes, which is what it would have been had it been made in the 80s or 60s.
You said you were looking at, and you're writing a book about acting, like British TV acting. How much do you think kind of the American kind of TV crime dramas have influenced in British acting? For example, Sherlock Holmes' character, played by Benedict Cumberbatch, is very similar to... I've been trying to remember now the two particular TV programs I'm thinking of from America.
Right.
But they're these two crime dramas where
modern crime dramas?
Yes.
Elementary or?
Yes.
Yeah,
Elementary is one, and I can't remember the name of the other one. I think Elementary is the one I was thinking of. There's another guy where the main character's name is Gene something, but they're very kind of quirky like that. How much do you think there's that kind of influence, that crossover between the acting from kind of the American to the British, and how much do you think that influences?
Historically, there really wasn't that much, because America moved to single camera production much sooner than Britain. Because America had all these Hollywood sound stages that just weren't being used, and so they set up these companies like Desilu that made Star Trek, which is the old RKO studios, and so American TV acting went from live multi-camera to film single camera much sooner than we did, and it was a very gradual shift here. And I think because we got a bit of both, people accepted that British acting was, they used to put it outside in, all about the voice, the body, the gestures, the costume, the walk. Laurence Olivier, Alec Guinness famously, I've got to find the shoes, I've got to find the walk. That's contrasting with the American style Inside Out, which people always associate with the Method and Marlon Brando and the Actors Studio. But that gave more currency there. In fact, we've been teaching Stanislavski in British schools for years and years. I think it's a fact that now people have so much access to things like HBO, Netflix. You can't ignore those influences. It was quite nice to have two distinct styles, American and British, theatrical and cinematic, historically. And I think that boundary's gone now. It's interesting, Johnny Lee Miller and Benedict Cumberbatch, probably know, were both in Frankenstein at the National at the same time. They would alternate roles, so they're very much contemporaneous. Either one, I think, could have played the character in either production, but Cumberbatch just got in first. They wanted to buy the format of Sherlock for America, and Gatiss and Moffat said no, so that's why Elementary evolved. It's not their Sherlock. It's almost a rip-off of Sherlock.
Can I ask, a little bit Sherlock, sorry, Sherlock is obviously made for that American audience as well, isn't
Yes.
it?
Well, they go to the extent of reshooting certain scenes.
Yeah, that's so.
And they change the words. So there's a bit in this first series where Watson's left holding the can of paint after someone's a graffiti artist has sprayed something and dashed off with Sherlock. And then the next scene is they gave me an ASBO, Sherlock. And that, of course, doesn't make any sense. What does ASBO stand for? See what kind of students you get here at the University of Hertfordshire, the same as Salford. Whereas ASBO means nothing to Americans, so they gave me, they had to change the dialogue and refilm it. So it's not like they're dubbing it or anything. There's two. If you watch Sherlock in America, you're watching a slightly different version of Sherlock. Liz Evans has written about this. It's fascinating, but it is, clearly. Why is it 90 minutes? Why it was originally going to be 60-minute episodes, Sherlock. The pilot is 60 minutes. They're going to make 6 60-minute episodes. A very traditional crime drama format for Britain. The BBC said, no, go away, make it 90 minutes. Why 90 minutes? That's a strange length for BBC to make a crime drama. Because in America, that's 2 hours. It's clearly got a global audience in mind, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that sort of quintessential Englishness. All the very modern shots, modern London, the London Eye and the Swiss Ray Gherkin and all that kind of thing. So they're not just making it for Brits.
No.
Absolutely.
So it's really interesting to see that kind of fusion, even though they're obviously redoing those things. But it is very British for an American audience too, so it's quite a skill, isn't it, to get that acting right, as well as the production and everything else. But yeah.
Well, Mark Freeman and Cumberbatch are two very different styles of British actor.
Yeah.
Freeman is very naturalistic,
yeah.
and he's someone you'd expect to see in films. And Cumberbatch sort of epitomises that British theatre tradition.
Yeah.
He does do a lot of theatre. I mean, they both do a lot of theatre. They've both done film, but you can see that Cumberbatch is more of an outside-in actor. Beautiful voice, beautiful posture, lovely cheekbones. Whereas Martin Freeman is much more internal. He does it with his eyes, little nods. And you're picking up exactly on what Watson is feeling in those moments. He doesn't have to project it.
Yeah.
But Cumberbatch has range because he plays other characters where he's not as manic as he is when he's playing Sherlock. They've got that skill set. Whereas actors in the old days probably could do one thing very well, and that's what they did on TV.
Yeah.
That's a style they were trained for, the stage-derived style. Then they have to be far more adaptable these days.
And learn an American accent too, of course. Rachel.
It's just just touching on your comment about realism and spontaneity in a sense in Sherlock. Could you just talk us through a little bit more about the fact that rehearsal has disappeared and they go straight to on location? Is it high definition or is it film?
It's HD video now.
So it's HD. And did Gatius talk with you about how many times they're prepared to do a take, or is it basically straight through?
I didn't ask Mr. Gatius specifically about how many takes you would do, but it's not. I spoke to some film actors like Jason Fleming, who's done television and film, and he said, because like doing a single camera, you've got the luxury to go again. You can do 8, 9 takes. And I spoke to TV actors, you do not get 8 or 9 takes. Certainly, if you're not the lead actor. If you were one of the supporting cast and you said, I didn't really feel I gave my best, that's tough, If it's in the can, it's in the can, so to speak. But then all those different angles, they need to do it again and again and exactly the same. So it has to be spontaneous or seem spontaneous, but the actor then has to replicate that exactly so it matches in the edit. So they can't be changing their performance when they get bored halfway through. So it's a strange mix of spontaneity and repetition. Whereas in the old days, it was all about the preparation. When do I sit down? When do I brush? And then you did it once. So arguably that was more spontaneous, doing a performance all the way through. It's far more like having a conversation in real life rather than breaking it up in a sequence. So they're two very different skill sets. So one person I spoke to said, they were talking about Rhys Evans, I don't know how you say it. So, he's a brilliant actor, he does it exactly the same every time. Is that a brilliant actor? Becomes this sort of mechanical repetition of exactly the same thing.
Makes it easier to cut the text together.
Yeah, exactly. That's what they meant by it. It's wonderful. But other actors say, you get a different performance every time, which makes editing very difficult. I think I'd be more excited to work with somebody who does it differently every time. If I were an actor, they're throwing different things at me.
I want to work with a dog.
The dog was the most spontaneous of the lot, wasn't it?
Yeah, totally upstaged everybody else. Yeah, you could see him trying to keep the dog down. Yeah, you never work with animals and children. Are there any more questions? No. Okay. So I'm sure you'd like to join me. So thank you so much, Richard.
Thank you for having me.
It's lovely to see you.